This is the brand new Sony a7 IV, and this has every upgrade that people have been asking for the last 4 years. But I do have to say, if you got your hands on the a7S III or the A1, then half the things from this camera isn't going to surprise you. But for those of you who've waited, boy, you're in for a real treat. This is a byproduct of what the creative community have been asking for, all the feedback that Sony have received since the launch of the a7 III. And I'm just gonna start blasting. This has a flip out screen, a better menu system, 10-bit 422 video, 4K 60, I'm gonna put an asterisk on that. A dedicated record button, down to the strap rings not being as loose. Like, wow. Okay, some extra context. A few years ago, popular vloggers were saying these strap rings were way too loose, so they were causing way too much noise while they were trying to vlog, so they had to cut them off. So what Sony did was they engineered these strap rings to have a little bit more friction so we don't have that loose strap ring noise anymore. Okay, so the point of that story is that Sony listened, and there's so much more of these kinds of feedbacks that came to life in these newer iterations of alpha cameras, which we'll try to go through as many as possible in this video. And a portion of this video is sponsored by Squarespace. Alright, so let's go ahead and start off with the look and feel first. Immediately when you pick up the camera, it feels different from the Mark III, and that's because they increased the grip on this camera. If you felt the grip on the Mark III was a little too small to grip, the 4 might feel a lot better. But the camera did not get heavier. It's only about a 13-gram difference between the two cameras. The buttons, they feel squishier, which feels really nice to press on. And you're gonna notice the new double-decker mode dial. Very similar to the ones on the A9 and the A1, but not quite. The bottom wheel here is a switch between the different capture modes, and the top here focuses on the different exposure modes and memory profiles. So they simplify the amount of turns you will need to do now to access certain modes. Like, you don't have to do 3 turns just to get from photo mode to movie mode, which is a huge upgrade in terms of quality of life. And the port doors here are so much better. A huge upgrade from the flimsy dangling ones from the Mark III. We have a mic jack, headphone jack, USB-C, and USB-A micro. Pretty standard stuff. And now we actually have a full-size HDMI. Over here on the other end on the memory slot, they actually swapped the position between slot 1 and slot 2, which is gonna throw you for a loop. I don't know why they didn't do it this way 4 years ago, but whatever, we have the proper way now. But the slot 1 here also supports the new CF Express Type A card. These types of cards are incredibly fast, but also incredibly expensive. So unless you're shooting really high quality videos or you're really bursting down on that shutter with uncompressed RAW, a fast SD card is good enough. Okay, so flip out screen. I have to admit, I'm a changed man now. You see, I was okay with the tilt screen. It never really bothered me until I started using the Sony a7S III. And funny enough, it's not because I needed to see myself while I do these vlogs right here. I actually have an external monitor for that. But rather, it's for the portrait orientation or vertical shooting, which I've been doing a lot more of because of the flip out screen. It is incredibly hard to do with a tilt screen. And considering vertical videos have exploded now more than ever, a flip out screen is more than a necessity. This is also now a touch navigated display, so you can go through the menu with your finger, pinch to zoom, you know, typical stuff you can do with a touch display. It's no longer just limited to tap to focus. But the one thing about the screen that I'm happy about is the bump in resolution on the LCD display, and it now has a better color representation. On the a7 III, when you go up on the brightness to sunny weather, things become super contrasty and the colors just don't look right. I would often just use it for framing purposes and then look through my viewfinder just to make sure that I'm not blowing out my highlights. But on the a7 IV, it's so much better, and you'll actually have an easier time telling if things are in focus when you punch in. Before the a7 IV, I would tell everybody to get the Sony a7S III just because the screen is so much better. And technically it is better than the a7 IV, but the a7 IV is a much more affordable upgrade now, so get this. Obviously, we have the new menu system. It's great. Everything is placed in sections that makes a lot more sense now. However, I'm not gonna talk too much about it other than it's gonna take you a while to get used to it. But I do, however, wanna talk about how crazy customizable this camera is. For example, you'll notice that there is no number markings on the EB dial, and that's because you can now reprogram it. You can have it change your shutter speed, your aperture value, cycle through your creative looks profile, and change the Kelvin on your white balance. But the stuff that's gonna really excite users the most is that we can actually separate photo settings and video settings. And I'm not talking about the buttons, okay? I'm talking about the quick function menu items and when you literally just turn the dial. Like I could be shooting a video with S-Log3 ISO 800 in crop mode, but then switch to photo mode and have a completely different setting. No picture profile, ISO on auto, in full frame mode. And this isn't like a memory recall profile either. It actually remembers the last setting that you've made. Let's say, for example, I change the white balance from sunny to cloudy in video mode, switch to photo mode, snap a few shots, and then come back to video mode. It will still remember that I've changed my white balance to cloudy. Oh, and you know how our video file names are C001, C002, C003? Wow. Like photo files, the camera will actually continue the sequential order even when you swap SD cards. Or you can even change the video file naming to whatever you like and even add a date prefix to the file name. And the beauty to all of this is that we can save all the customized settings and have different sets of user profiles. Especially when you're shooting with a team, your settings might be different compared to someone else's, but you have to use their camera, let's say. You can load your settings onto their A7 IV via your phone, and they can load their settings back once the shoot is done. I can't tell you how many times that I have to use my friend's camera at a wedding, and I'm just like, bro, I don't know how to change any of your settings. Transferring photos and videos to your phone just got a lot better as well. You can now choose to send all your photos or all your videos, though I don't know why you would do that. But what I personally love is being able to transfer all my rated photos. You see, on the A7 III, I would mark all my photos with a 1-star first, and then when I want to transfer those photos to my phone, I would have to go find those 1-star photos again and select them one by one. And God forbid, if I accidentally cancel out of it, I would have to start over again. With the A7 IV, you can actually target all your star-rated photos and transfer them to your phone. Easy peasy. Okay, so I'm gonna have to cut myself off right here because we could be here all day for me to go over every single little quality of life improvement on the A7 IV. I think it's just more important for me to highlight the more important ones in this video. For a list of changes, I actually made a video talking about the 50 differences between the Sony A7 III and the Sony A7 IV. So go ahead and click right up here to queue it up. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk performance. This camera is crazy fast. It uses the same latest processor as the Sony A7S III and the A1. But not to confuse you that this camera is capable of 20 or 30 frames per second like the A9 or the A1. It is still a 10 frames per second burst, and obviously you can burst it and still go through the menu. The latest processor will help with that and write to cards faster if you use cards that can keep up. But what I'm talking about is the real-time tracking autofocus. It is so good. You see, I never thought the A7 III was slow until I put them side by side, and the A7 IV is just so quick at acquiring focus. Like once it detects a face, bam, it reacts very quickly. And this is us right here tracking at f1.2 with the 50G master. Look at how the focus is glued to Vivian's face, especially when she gets extremely close to the screen. Like, my God, the Mark IV just holds the focus so much better. So this is gonna be a big upgrade right here. Now we have things like touch tracking autofocus, continuous eye autofocus in video, improved animal eye autofocus, and now bird eye autofocus as well. And actually, we have animal and bird eye autofocus in video mode as well. Animal eye autofocus was exclusively for photos, and it will be for the older cameras just because of the limitation in tech. But moving forward, the A7 IV and beyond, we will have it for video as well. Okay, so let's talk photo specs. We got that bump in megapixel that we've been speculating for years now, and we were right on the ball for that. 33 megapixels in full frame mode and 15 megapixels in APS-C mode. And really, that's just gonna allow us to have that extra flexibility when we need to crop our photos and having those more megapixels to sample off of for any sort of photo manipulation. And with 33 megapixels, it's not as crazy high as the A7R or the A1 where it's 40, 50, 60 megapixels. That's where your computer will start to choke trying to process those high-res photo files. 33 again is the sweet spot, right? It won't start killing off your hard drive space too quickly. And while we don't have small, medium, or large RAWs, we do have lossless compressed RAWs, which is a nice middle ground where you have photos that are like zip files. You have all the data within that file itself, but in a very light package. Similarly, we also now have high efficiency image format, which is a middle ground for RAWs and JPEGs, where you may not need all that data from a RAW file, but still want some of that flexibility in post compared to a JPEG file. But let's move on to video because we have a lot to talk about. While the highest resolution is still 4K, we got a slight bump in quality because the Mark IV actually oversamples from 7K as opposed to 6K on the A7 III. So things are gonna look a little crisper in your full frame videos. In APS-C, it's a 4.6K oversample, so still really good 4K quality if you need to shoot and crop because, yeah, well, let me just go ahead and put in another asterisk to that right there. But we got a ton of crazy good video features that I was not expecting. Some we've seen on the A7S III and some are making their debut on the A7 IV. So let's start off with the obvious first. The Sony A7 IV can also now shoot in H.265, which is in that same high efficiency vein, high quality videos but lower file size. And to my surprise, this camera can do 10-bit 422. So shooting with any sort of log profiles like HLG or S-Log3 just became a lot more viable, especially with all that 15 plus stops of dynamic range. You don't have to worry about your colors falling apart too quickly or seeing banding in the sky. Even shooting in S&Q just became a lot more viable. We got a bump from 12 to 16 megabits per second, all the way up to 100 megabits per second, up to 10-bit 422. But if you're a quality fiend, you can actually shoot All-Intra 4K up to 600 megabits per second. I just think it's absolutely hilarious because they're calling this the basic alpha model, and yet we're getting all these A7S III-like video qualities. And yes, in case you're wondering, we do have the elusive PP11 S-Cinetone picture profile, a straight cinematic color look without too much grading. But the features that they're debuting on this camera is focus mapping and focus breathing compensation. We'll start off with focus mapping first, which looks like you're detecting heat waves, but it's actually a new way, for alpha users at least, to check focus. And this is normally a separate focus checker device used in the movie industries, but this is built into the A7 IV directly. You see, unlike peaking where there are just dots everywhere on the screen, how focus mapping works, it's whatever is not covered by the color squares is where your shot is in focus. Pretty neat, huh? Anything blue is behind depth of field and anything in red is in front of depth of field. And I love it especially when you're just using the small LCD screen alone. This just quickly gives you the confidence in focus at a glance. Next up, focus breathing compensation. Because a lot of Sony lenses are designed for photography first, video second, some lenses will produce focus breathing that is not appealing to video shooters. To compensate for that, Sony has included focus breathing correction, which will automatically account for breathing, and it will crop into your footage to minimize the noticeability of breathing when you're focus racking back and forth. And that's pretty neat. That's a nice compromise, so you don't have to go out and buy a dedicated G Master Cine lens just to avoid focus breathing. However, this only works best with Sony lenses unless third-party lenses is able to transmit that type of data to the camera itself for that focus breathing compensation. Okay, so let's talk 4K 60. Coming back to all the asterisks that I've been putting on this note right here. I think a lot of video shooters are looking forward to this, right? The Sony A7 IV can shoot 4K 60, but only in crop mode. I'm not gonna say I'm not disappointed, I am, but it's not the end of the world. We've gotten so many amazing upgrades on this camera, but I still couldn't help but feel a little bummed because Sony could have totally made this possible, right? 4K 60 in full frame, we've seen it on the A1. You see, if I'm buying a full frame camera, I wanna be able to use all of its best feature in full frame mode. It just makes sense. So to be held back on the 4K 60 just seems a little odd considering everything else they've given us. 10-bit 422, All-Intra 4K recording, 15 plus stops of dynamic range. So I don't know why it's held back, right? I can understand this camera not having 4K 120. I didn't expect 4K 120. And quite frankly, we should pay a premium if we want 4K 120. However, the thing is, 4K 60 was such a logical next step from the A7 III to the A7 IV. And I thought I could get over it, and for the most part I could for focal lengths that are 35mm and up. But then I remember I picked up the 14 G Master. I love this lens. It's incredibly wide, it is incredibly bright, and it's incredibly light. However, if I were to use this lens with the Sony A7 IV in 4K 60, I'm gonna get hit with that 1.5 times crop, making this lens a 21mm. That's not why I bought this lens. And I think that's the perspective a lot of full frame users who are buying full frame setups will share. As a hybrid camera, I would recommend the hell out of this, but for videos, it's still gonna have to be the A7S III or the FX3. They're literally the best. 4K 60 and 4K 120 in full frame. Anyways, I don't want to keep focusing on it. If you plan on using 4K 60 purely for slow motion purposes, the tighter framing may not be a bad thing, considering that slow motion tends to look better with a closer framing anyway. That's why with focal lengths like 35 or 50, it doesn't really bother me because I'm cropping in a little bit closer. 35 becomes a 50, 50 becomes like an 85. And it does look amazing. And if we want a wider framing, we can circumvent that crop by getting a wider APS-C lens. And the bonus to that is that it makes our entire setup much more lighter. And that's the positivity that I'm exuberating to you guys. Moving on, I do notice the A7 IV is slightly noisier compared to the A7 III, and I'm not entirely sure if it's because it has some more megapixels, therefore the noise is more apparent, or if the A7 III has some kind of noise reduction going on, but I'm sure Gerald will have a video getting into the nitty-gritty of ISO and dynamic range performance. He'll be way more informative on that subject matter than I ever can. But yeah, just based on my test, the A7 IV does look a little noisier compared to the A7 III in terms of high ISO performance. Okay, so I kind of want to blast through these last few things right here just because I've been talking forever, but there's still so much more to this camera, but I think the last few points are some of the more important ones to know. So plugging into an external monitor now won't cause you to lose face or eye autofocus when you're shooting in 4K, and the back of your LCD won't black out. And also, a little bonus, the grid lines on the LCD screen won't disappear when you connect to an external monitor, which is fantastic because I love using the back of the LCD screen to frame up my shot and an external monitor right here to check focus. Every time I need to reframe and make sure that my lines are straight, I have to unplug the monitor on the S3 just to make sure I have the framing right and then plug it back in. But with the A7 IV, you don't have to do that. By the way, in case you didn't know, the Sony A7 IV does not have a 30-minute recording limit. So you can pretty much keep recording until your cards fill up or when your battery dies. In my test, I got about 2 hours and 15 minutes of 4K 24 recording before the battery juiced out, and filled up two 64GB SD cards shooting 4K 60p with about 23% battery to spare. That's about an hour and 40 minutes of 4K 60p footage. During this whole time, the overheating signal did not come on. And lastly, Sony has made some improvement to their live streaming with their mirrorless cameras. You can actually plug the Sony A7 IV directly to your computer via a USB-C cable. And if you're using USB 3.2 ports and cable, you can actually up your webcam quality all the way up to 4K 15 frames per second or 1080p 60 frames per second. Otherwise, if you're using a slower port or a slower cable, you're capped at 720. Okay, so price. It's gonna be $2,500 a body only, $2,700 with the kit lens. It's about $500 more than the current A7 III right now, and I don't know if the price for the A7 III will drop, but it makes sense considering how much they beefed up this camera. It's literally in a class of its own. It has all the upgrades that we've anticipated, minus the 4K 60 in full frame, but if you can overlook that, the Sony A7 IV is one hell of a solid camera for hybrid shooting. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. If you guys found this video super helpful and you want to support the channel, the best thing that you can do for me is give this video a like, and also stick around and listen to what my sponsor Squarespace has to say. Vivian and I always strive to bring you guys the best and most unique image and video samples whenever we talk about cameras and lenses. And oftentimes we have high production costs to make this all happen. It's sponsors like Squarespace that help fund our production budget so we can keep bringing you guys more high quality samples. So the best way to support us and to help us continue to do what we do is to simply check out how Squarespace can help you. Link down below. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to create beautiful websites. No coding knowledge whatsoever. Perfect for people like me because I just want to make YouTube videos for you guys and not have to worry about coding my entire website. Simply just select one of their templates to get started. Every aspect is easily customizable with their drag and drop feature. Whether you're in need of a portfolio, an e-commerce store, or even a simple blog, design it with Squarespace. Use my link down below to test it out, and when you're ready to launch your first website or domain, use my code JasonVong to save 10% off. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!